A Deadman's Guide to Dragongrin is an original fantasy setting by Absolute Tabletop, published in 2020 following a successful Kickstarter. Its 454 pages establishes a high fantasy continent ruled by a Dark Lord, the land divided into 11 distinct regions overlaid with 11 distinct cultures. The book is tuned to the D&D 5th edition rule set, but like any Absolute Tabletop product, they don't lash the book too tightly to 5e crunch. It stands pretty comfortably as a system-agnostic resource. In case you're wondering about the name, Dragongrin in the setting is meant to mean dragon grave in one of its ancient languages. For the most part, there are no more dragons, but their graves, or grins, dot the landscape. I have some thoughts on this at the end of the video. The book presents a setting that is very tightly focused on a particular point in a timeline. As the story is told, there were once primordials, these huge naturalistic creatures of extreme power, and Titan, these also huge creatures who embraced what is essentially Magitech. The two races fought each other, primordials creating dragons and dragonkin to fight the Titans and their massive arcanic creations. They all died. Fast forward centuries and millennia to just 20 years ago, and we see the Holithic Church invade the peaceful land of Vist. A Vistian general named Gul'Varus rises to the challenge to defeat the invaders, but dabbles in time magic, using a so-called crucible to find a version of the future that doesn't include him dying. Here's where the fun starts. He gets so desperate to avoid death that he shatters the time-space continuum, creating pocket dimensions all through Dragongrin, and carving his homeland of Vist out of time-space altogether. Himself being physically shattered but still alive and more powerful than ever, Gul'Varus is dubbed the Dismembered Lord. This Dismembered Lord serves as the nigh-on invincible villain of the setting, being a dark and unseen tyrant who appoints the governors of each of the regions within his control. He's a sort of petty demigod who demands absolute loyalty from every last person in the realm, and is obsessively tweaking the timeline to preserve himself and his power. Surely, the first thing that any self-respecting player of Dungeons & Dragons is going to want to do is roll up their party and try to kill the Dismembered Lord. But the authors did a couple of things that make this impossible. First, in the 12 pages that detail him, they include a layer and stat blocks reminiscent of Orcus at the end of Rapan Athuk, just really hard to get to and kill. But then they include this paragraph, which basically states that any table running Dragongrin is creating an alternate timeline for the Dismembered Lord and is officially canon. So unless everyone who buys this book and runs it has their players kill him, he will continue to live. That's a bit meta, obviously, and the authors are just trying to empower their GMs, which I think is cool. The one thing I do have issue with is that twice in the book, they declare that Dragongrin is not, quote, meant to be sadistic or celebrate evil, and that it is intended to celebrate goodness and light. This does not appear to be the case, although it is clear that the Dismembered Lord's hold on the land and on his time magic is slipping. It is actually slipping towards catastrophic, multi-dimensional devastation, not anything good. And more importantly, the book does a very thorough and excellent job of describing the sort of army of darkness under the main villain's command. Called the Dismembered Legion, this army is lovingly and exhaustively detailed not necessarily as an army to defeat, but as one to optionally play as. There are 6 main ranks, along with 10 specialist ranks, standardized weapons and equipment, as well as pages and pages detailing how to create Legion missions and military unit names and the like. This is all very cool stuff, possibly the best Army of Darkness material to come out in years, but it doesn't feel like a celebration of goodness and light. There is a faction of resistance called the Undying Light, who are based on a floating city called the Copper Sun, but these two things are not detailed in the book at all. No tables or stats or anything. I won't give the spoiler here as to why that is the case in setting, but let's just say the reason is very dark. The beating golden heart of this book is the 11 cultures presented. Each one is given a 4-page spread that covers their beliefs, typical names, their history, and their goals. What strikes me about each of them is 1, how unique they are from each other, and 2, how for the most part they transcend race or heritage. Any race can be in any culture, which if you think about it is really a sort of utopian concept. Here are the cultures very briefly. They include hefty mechanical bonuses to players who choose them, but I'm just going to touch on the essential concepts here. Ardor, a once proud theistic people who invaded the land of Gul'Varus under the banner of the Holithic Church. They lost, and for the past 20 years they have served as slaves. Crucian, a culture entirely dedicated to praising the Dismembered Lord and scheming against each other for more power and influence. Members of the Crucian culture are selected into powerful houses from the land, irrespective of race and solely on talents and abilities. Drogas, salvagers and tinkerers, explorers bound together by individual tribes or chains. They often include refugees and outcasts, but enjoy prowess with the ancient tech called Archon. Granok Thane, incredible and feared warriors with no homeland. They run the mercantile system that spans the realm and are loyal to the Dismembered Lord. Grimdul, nomadic mystics who can see glimpses of the future and are masters of horse-mounted battle. Holmir, dragon slayers and master hunters going back to ancient times. They wield arcane magic and maintain a code of honor rarely seen among the cultures. The Mord, benign immortals who have a long view of things. They gain immortality through elderstones, crystals imbued with the time magic of the setting called imminence. Sarek, skeletal undead who retain their souls and live in a society of perfect equality. They have only existed for as long as the Dismembered Lord messed up the world 20 years ago. Talisar, a rigid society based on combat and centered around the recently uprooted Life Tree, a floating tree city. They're mostly elves, but will accept those who swear loyalty to their cause and who prove themselves. Zarfin, masterful tinkerers and engineers of the ancient magitech known as Arcanics. They not only repair and restore arcanic relics, they create new pieces of original design. Silverwise, a millennia-old culture organized into guilds, each of which is tasked with guarding the entranceways into other, darker dimensions. They also each usually have a dog. There are pages and pages that unpack the 29 backgrounds on offer, each of which surprisingly comes with an illustration of recommended starter equipment. Then there are the 12 core classes, each rebranded for the world of Dragongrin. Each of these classes are thoroughly and carefully stitched into the setting. They each come with a handful of tables for backgrounds and class quests, as well as 2 subclasses. The Wizard, for example, can follow the school of the Roiling Bleak, a reference to the magical storms that ravage the realm, or the School of the Thaumavore. Hey, nice. So it looks like the Thaumavores in this book go around absorbing other people's hard-earned spell casts and then regurgitates them as generally less impressive effects. Doesn't sound anything like this channel. There are only 5 feats and 14 new spells on offer, but the spells do mostly tie in strongly with the setting itself. Then there is a D100 table for traits, one for flaws, another for burden, and another for hopes, and even a D100 for trinkets, each contributing to the softer RP side of one's character. Believe it or not, the book then goes on for many more pages of tables, offering countless more RP aspects for character background and bonds with other party members. You could easily fill a page with background details for a single PC just from rolling on each of the tables here. There are 11 dominions of ash, or regions, in the setting's continent. Each of them are unique from one another, and all of them have been affected by the Dismembered Lord's victory and 20-year rule. Each dominion consists of about 5 pages of description and tables, a map, 2 general adventures called cruxes, each spanning about 3 pages, and a final 3-page spread detailing either a key NPC or entity. I'm going to briefly describe each region, but I have to comment up front here that the location descriptions and the 2 included adventures for each region are not table ready. In other words, the authors supply you with very fertile soil for your imagination, but you have to expand on a lot of it yourself and source your own encounter maps, NPC portraits, and even stat blocks. For the most part, you don't even get DCs for any of the obstacles, which of course makes the material much more flexible and system agnostic, but it is certainly a bane for any beginner GM. So here are the Dominions of Ash. Grin. This is by far the most important region of the book in terms of understanding the setting. If you read just one region, flip to page 214 and read this one. This is where the big bad villain Gul Varus used to live, and where he defeated the invaders and became the Dismembered Lord using time magic. He isolated the entire region in a sort of time bubble and created a false utopia. Aquanus, half-sunken islands riddled with eldritch horrors and wild magic. A dark magical force called the Desolation grows beneath the water and threatens reality itself. Aquanus indeed. Feygrave, an enchanted forest in its death throes. It was home to Talus the Life Tree, a city-sized tree with its own generational ecosystem of elves. Now it's a realm teetering on the brink of ruin and darkness. Talus the Life Tree, now floating above ground to escape the ravage of war, the inhabitants of this magical city fight each other in a twisted civil war all their own. Inns, beautiful hill country transformed into treacherous swampland by a bunch of orcs. This was the homeland of the Ardor and the Holithic Church, and was desecrated on purpose, just to spite the failed invaders. Even now it is ruled by an orc lord appointed from the top. Jahar, a desert wasteland home to the powerful, infinitely precious remains of the ancient titans and their technology. If the giant desert creatures and warring sultans above ground weren't enough, there's a sinister entity known as the Rictus, working on some very dark stuff underground. Severe, a mountain region riddled with undead, the Desolation, and a vampire governor. Severe below, a series of gargantuan canals and grottos under the mountains that, as you may have guessed, used to be really nice, until the Dismembered Lord came around. Now it's a beehive of criminals and gangs, each trying to protect their turf. Uldane, a completely ravaged no man's land, destroyed by a magical storm called the Bleak that still rages on. So, a permanent raging Bleak Storm that spits out more twisted creatures that you might have to fight, check. Hordes of horrible flying insectoid predators nesting in a coagulated mixture of hardened vomit and fecal matter, check. Varnholm, a Nordic northern region still ruled by Jarls, but is under threat of invasion by the Dismembered Lord. Here the winters grow longer and the fish become fewer and fewer with each passing year. There is some old magic here, and whispers of a frozen king? Zaman, a fast-spreading, dangerous jungle that hides the priceless ruins of a forgotten empire. If you haven't picked up on it by now, each of these regions is presented as a different subsetting, and as I mentioned earlier, the level of detail for each area is enough to get started, but needs a GM with at least some world-building chops to finish up, or a table full of creative players who can help do that on the fly while playing. Probably my second favorite part of the book, besides the cultures, are the collection of optional rules that the authors present to supplement the D&D 5e rule set. They are scattered across a few different chapters, but here are my favorites. Infamy. Assigning infamy points to characters, or optionally to a whole party, results in either good or bad things happening to them narratively. This works well with the setting because it's supposed to be an oppressive world where being famous for any reason is dangerous and rare. Travel. The authors suggest breaking down travel into two kinds of narrative devices. Either a glance, where a period of travel is described around the table with maybe one skill roll, or a scene, where a travel-related encounter is played out. You can speed up or slow down travel between places by combining glances and scenes. Brutality. The cleverest set of rule differences here are the ones that make 5e more deadly, from a drastic reduction or removal of magic healing, to maxing out one's die damage value on a critical hit, to a D100 table on how you've been maimed. It's a breath of fresh air to see a meticulous and thoughtful, grimdark adaptation to the 5e rules. Resurrection. Rather than just casting a resurrection spell on a buddy, the authors present a 3.5-page alternative where you have to enter a purgatorial dimension called the Wailing Grey and go through a mini-adventure to get your buddy's soul back. And of course, they're still never the same again. There are a few more alternative rules, but these were some of the most notable to me. There is a constant magical storm that travels around the realm called the Bleak, which came about when the Dismembered Lord shattered reality 20 years ago. This storm is not a vague sort of damage-dealing tornado, but rather a traveling mini-adventure for players to get sucked into. It is composed of 7 parts, each of which are rolled by the GM on their respective tables. Even the location of the dice help to map out parts of the storm, and ultimately your players need to find their way out. Unfortunately for the PCs, effects from being in a bleak storm ranges from weird hallucinations to blood being boiled in their veins. So here are my thoughts. Cons. The name Dragongrin. Here's the thing. The authors clearly have an understanding of what sounds cool in fantasy. Here are some of my favorite terms in this book. They just sound so cool, like Granach Thane, the brutal warrior culture and operators of the red sale market. Thanium, the strongest and most valuable metal in the realm. Zur-Kith, the most powerful breed of the ancient dragons, the ceaseless travail, a workers' rebellion. But then there's Dragongrin. I don't want to get into why I think this name is really funky, just consider me mystified by this. Lack of copper sun and undying light. The one true resistance force to be played against the Dismembered Lord is absent. It makes this book very dark indeed. The cruxes. As a GM, you will need to do a lot of heavy lifting if you want to use a crux, or adventure, at the table, like generating encounter maps, stat blocks, NPC portraits, DCs, and a lot of details. But to be fair, AbTab excels at the higher level ideas rather than the nitty-gritty of each fight scene. This has always been the case. Pros. The cultures. Each of the 11 cultures are distinct and come with actual game mechanics for your character. They are the main conduit for breathing true life into this setting, and they are brilliant. The layout. In terms of book design, Alexander Kostic and Tim Kearney and whoever else worked on this did a masterful job. Basically, they avoided text walls. This makes the book and its contents far easier to read and absorb. But in many cases, they broke up the text walls with more actual information. Long story short, this book is a case study in how to present a ton of information in a way that is irresistible to the human eye. Your world. On my first reading, I was not in love with the amount of open-ended details. Not only are there literally millions of iterations of what the full picture of Dragongrin looks like, everyone's version is a splinter universe and officially canon. But that's cool because it's casual. Dragongrin is not AbTab's world, it's your world. So how are your players going to die in it? Thanks as always for watching. Let me know about your experiences with Dragongrin in the comments. This is Dave signing off. See ya.